Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over my Paldea Evolved Buy list for the competitive side of the Pokemon TCG. Once again, this is a massive set for us in terms of setting up the biggest tournaments of the year. So let's get straight into it. Starting off with the core essentials. These are cards that are expected to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have obvious future potential. And I do think this set gives us a ton of cards which are not only going to see immediate play, but we'll see a huge amount of play going into the future of this format. Some great framework being built up from a number of these cards. Iono is the first card that springs to mind. You absolutely have to get 4 copies of this card. It's going to be in a huge number of decks. Almost all archetypes will at least consider this card, even if it is just a 1 or 2 count. And then there will be a huge number of decks that are choosing to play 3 or 4 copies of Iono. I will never bat the eyelids at someone who adds in an Iono to their deck, because it gives every player a comeback card, as well as an early game consistency option, so it really fits the bill perfectly. Reversal Energy, slightly less splashable, but still really seems to have hit the ground running. I can easily see this going into the best Gardevoir decks. I can see this going into all sorts of other builds. Looking at Lugia as well, having this as a splash alongside a Luxray package, which is just down here. So yeah, I think 4 copies is definitely what we're going to go for, seeing as though there are some very defensive Gardevoir lists doing well already. Charm of Courage is a big hit point buff to basics, and I feel like 4 copies is okay, because there will be possibly some archetypes that really lean into this quite heavily. Artisan, a nice consistency upgrade, although I don't think there will be many decks currently playing 4 copies, seeing as though we already have great basic ball search and VIP pass and level ball and nest ball, of course. I do think this will be a great supplementary stadium, and there could be arguments to go on high accounts of this in certain archetypes if you're always looking for path bounces in addition to early game search. Super odd, fantastic upgrade for Pokemon recovery. It's definitely going to go into Gardevoir decks. It's definitely going into Chien-pao Baxcalibur as at least a one-of, and many other archetypes will justify this as well. I can certainly see this upgrading Clara in current builds of Lost Zone also. Luminous Energy, a fantastic one for the future. I feel like there are some versatile options for Luminous already. This could make its way into Lugia alongside a mini package with Radiant Charizard. Of course, this is only a colorless energy if there are other special energy attached, but if you still have the 1 copy of Luminous going on to a Charizard in the late game, it then acts as your fire energy. And I think this is just a really versatile card to have for the future, a fantastic binder piece, because whenever new sets come out, there will be more reasons to look at Luminous all over again. Therapy Energy could hit the ground running in Lugia archetypes alongside Snorlax. I feel like this is more likely going to be a tier 2 contender, and I imagine the single strike build will still be more powerful and popular, but Therapy Energy is still making my counts here in the Snorlax builds for sure. Jet Energy, very similar story, is going to be great in Lugia decks, but is also fantastic for a number of Lost Zone box builds. I think specifically the Dragon Lost boxes, where we have the Giratina and the Goodra. These are probably going to go quite heavy on the Jet Energies, as giving you quite space-efficient ways to switch between your Convey in the opening stages, start building up that Lost Zone, but also because they are simply energy cards, they can also become Greninja fodder throughout the game as well, just for additional draw. Seems like an exceptional card. The biggest new archetype to come out from this set is Chien-pao Baxcalibur. I'm saying 3 copies is probably okay for Chien-pao, because there are still a number of 1 prize heavy decks in the format, so not leaning into this too heavily seems like a decent shout, but still having 3 copies in the deck means if you are having to be explosive and reload your multi-prizer in other multi-prize matchups, you have plenty. Baxcalibur, I think because of an Irida engine, you probably don't need to go for like a 4-line. Probably just a 3-0-3 or a 3-1-3 is going to be the way to go here, but this is the enabler for this archetype. And if you are a believer in the Chien-pao Baxcalibur deck, the Superior Energy Retrieval is definitely a card you're going to be playing in that deck list, seeing as though Chien-pao discards a whole heap of waters throughout the game, so getting that recovery is fantastic. I've already touched on Luxray with that reversal energy combo. It's finding its way into Gardevoir, it's finding its way into Lugia builds, and even some Lost Zone box builds are looking towards this Luxray, even with Mirage Gate without the reversal energy combination, as a great means of having some splashable lightning tech in the deck, which is exceptional. Spiritomb, another pretty big tech card, trying to deny the abilities of basic V Pokemon in play. This is mostly trying to target Genesect, so goes alongside that Drapion as a means of answering Mew players, but also has other upsides here and there with other V Pokemon around. Squawkabilly EX is one of these cards, which is, again, going to be a great binder card for you, even if you don't have any immediate reason to add it into your deck. But I could see this making its way into Lugia, for giving you extra discard option. I can see it making it into Arceus decks to give you more push potential from the likes of your Nest Balls in the opening stages to try and get Arceus energy drop. I definitely foresee it going in the Ting Lu archetype as a 2 count as well. That's why I'm saying 2 copies. But pretty much anything can justify this card because it's just giving you more push on the opening turn. And that allows you to use VIP Pass and just look for those in high accounts to just get set up into the game. So yeah, just a very versatile, strong card. And Ting Lu EX as well. I still think this could end up being a tier 2 style archetype. It's annoying, it's disruptive. You know people are going to try and lean on this card to just really shut down players in the opening stages. It's not a particularly difficult deck to build or play. So it may be able to hang with the top decks in the game if you're able to shut down the majority of these abilities. Onto the Believer buy list then. These are going to consist of cards that I think may prove themselves to be mid-tier contenders or have a good amount of future potential. Meowscarada's ability is still a great selling point, and if there are going to continue to be lots of Comfey engines and other lower hit point Pokemon sat around the board, perhaps using this ability to push things into allowing you to have multi-prize turns on one-prize decks, or allowing you to just sort of target down a chunkier Pokemon for a big knockout does seem pretty reasonable. I am saying the full 4 copies if you are a believer of Meowscarada, because you probably need to lean into this quite heavily if you are going to get any value out of it. For me right now, I feel like Meowscarada is probably best served alongside Arceus, because you're already playing Quad Double Turbo Energy, and Arc can give you some early game pressure without having to rely on a turn 2 Candy combo, as well as finding a Double Turbo Energy. That's just too much to find in the opening stages all in one go, so having an Arc trying to help you out there seems like a decent shout. Fortress EX is actually one of the most interesting cards, I think, coming out from the set. And I think we've had precedent for cards like this in the past, where I do think it's going to find its way at some point. We've already seen the new Toadscruel EX coming out at some point, and I think that will be a great partnership. So I probably will be picking up Fortress EX myself, knowing that probably in the immediate future this does nothing, but I think this ability will be used at some point when we get more Grass-type support. The Tinkaton EX and the Gather Materials Tinkaton combo, where you're trying to grow that large hand size, could easily be a low-tier contender. It is quite reliant on finding multiple Stage 2 Pokemon. Even though the deck is all based around draw, it's still slow to get going, I would say, but does have some big upside with some very high damage output potential. Copperaja EX has insane stats, being able to tank 330 hit points essentially with that built-in ability, and being able to swing for 260. These are just really big numbers, but Copperaja is difficult to power up, and getting a coherent deck list is probably the biggest challenge for right now, but it certainly could improve in future as we get more Pokemon and more support cards around this. Noivern EX, I'm just saying the 1 copy because I don't believe that a full-on Noivern deck could be a thing. More so, I think that the Noivern could make its way into a Regidrago-style deck, and this is just an extra string to that bow to give you even more disruptive options, where you have the locking of Special Energy and Stadium cards. Maybe you could do some cheeky things there with Path to the Peak, and you have the Covert Flight, which is annoying for basic decks as well. In the bottom left, we have the Wings of Union style deck, and I think you have to max out copies of these if you want to make it work. At the moment, I don't see it surviving in a format filled with Lost Zone, and that's one of the bigger issues around this archetype. But if ever Lost Zone decks kind of peter out, there easily could be a way for this archetype to see some play. Oricorio's healing ability seems reasonable if we are going to try and make some tanking decks happen. I think tanking is quite difficult right now in a format with Chien-pao for 1-hit KO potential, as well as Gardevoir, which has a very high cap. But if there are less tanking decks in the format, Oricorio could end up being... if there are less 1-hit KO decks in the format, Oricorio could end up being a decent option. I feel like Safeguard from Mimikyu covers a wide range of decks. However, almost every deck in the format also has means of dealing with this Mimikyu quite happily. So even though this is a very intimidating ability, I feel like most decks should have inbuilt answers, and the likes of Super Rod and other things like that to recycle those answers if ever they are faced with Mimikyu. Pelipper's ability is actually a very powerful one, and I feel like there could even be some controlling style archetypes budding from this sort of card at some point. I don't feel like this goes into any deck as of right now, but I certainly respect that ability and how intriguing it is, having the option to both tutor specific supporters from the deck, but also reuse specific supporters from the discard pile. It's something we haven't really seen in many other iterations, especially from an ability sense, so I think this is definitely an intriguing card that I want to have in the binder. And then we have Giacomo. Being able to discard a special energy from each of your opponent's Pokemon can be a new way of trying to disrupt Lugia players and Mew players, especially if we are moving more towards a fusion-based build of Mew, if that is going to be the expectation going into this format. So it could end up being a nice tech inclusion. I'm saying 4 counts because, similar to how we've seen focus on Cry of Destruction Yveltal and having heavy double turbo energies and stuff like that, perhaps there's a move away from Yveltal and a move towards Giacomo and just trying to spam the supporter in one of those sorts of matchups could be a direction that certain controlling decks choose to go down. Overall, I think this is a really powerful set. There are some massive staples that are going to be going into all sorts of archetypes. So I think it's definitely going to be a decent one to open packs from and get your hands on as many of these as possible. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.